Hi, Aarona. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm beaming from cheek to cheek because I feel like our beginning conversations have just been blissful, honestly, like and real. And I love it. It's deep work, and I'm so inspired by what you do every day. So thank you for being here with us today on Opportunity Knocks.
Thank you for the invitation. And as I said in our earlier conversation, just for seeing us and connecting to the Moon Deck and inviting me here.
Of course, of course. So today, Aarona Leá, who is the founder and author of the Moon Deck, which is not just this beautiful deck of cards, but it's so much more than that. She has a lot of other product offerings that she has between candles, but also notebooks and journals. But in addition, she offers workshops and classes that are in support of the Moon Deck. So the Moon Deck is, I wouldn't call it actually like they're oracle cards. However, I like to use it even just as a gauge for my daily practice, almost like setting the intention or the direction for the day. But I know that Aarona will tell us so much more about how she came to the origination of these cards. But I found them actually at PlateFit, and ooh, I like that.
Oh, this is the original. This is
That's
it came in
so
the wood box. This is where it all started. Yeah. So I was gonna maybe pick a card
exciting.
for us.
I can't wait to hear about it.
We'll have to get you a wood box. Yeah.
Plate fit, and they were laying out, and I was just intrigued because for me, I'm a product marketer, and so like, of course, I literally was like, "What are those? Those are interesting. I need to pull those over." And the illustrations really just guided me, and then the succinct messaging when you talk about being an author drew me in. So I'd love for you to kind of just for us to pull back the layers and get a better understanding of why oracle cards. Like, how did this come about?
Yes. Well, we our business has been around for about 6 years, and it took 2 years to create it. And it was a vision I had been holding inside for a few years before that. So it was incubating for quite a while. And card decks of all kinds have always helped me in my journey. And I had a pretty deep healing journey that started pretty young. And I'd say probably like in my early mid-teens, I started kind of dabbling into like more magical things and kind of more into the more esoteric side of things people call woo-woo now, which is such a funny word to me. That's like a whole nother conversation.
Woo. It means like woo woo.
Woo, like the woo means like the esoteric, like astrology, oracle decks, like, you know, some forms, modalities of healing. Some people call it woo-woo.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't believe in that either. I think it's just more like alternative paths, maybe, or different perspectives.
I think it's different perspectives, alternative paths, and it goes a lot of different ways in the modern culture, but I think at its root, it's quite ancient. At its root, it's been with us for a while, a long time. And religion, spirituality, so many of them, if you date back to their origins, started in the mystic realm and or started as like earth-based, nature-based, animism, like where like everything has a soul, everything has energy. We respect nature, we respect the journey of being a human. And I just think that things got fragmented along the way, and power struggles and redefining things. And who knows? I think it's
And
endless.
possibly.
Yeah. And some of that wisdom's probably burned and buried, that we'll never have access to. So in some ways, I think it's this ancient wisdom coming forward. And then of course, some of it gets diluted or, monetized and things like that. So I do think in this world of work, really any world of work, whether it's tarot cards, oracle cards, or Bitcoin these days, that discernment is necessary just because of human nature and how we take things and monopolize on them. So I do think it's important to be discerning when it comes to these practices. And for me, starting at a young age, decks were so helpful in my mental and emotional well-being. I'm such a visual kind of experiential person. So having this moment where I could pause and sit with my deck of cards and pick a card and have an image and a sentence and a short reading in the book and then a sort of experience with that and emotions really helped me get to know myself and connect to my own guidance and intuition. And sometimes I just needed that card to remind me what I already knew or felt inside. And it helped me make decisions. Sometimes it helped me access my truth. And sometimes it just helped me have a pause where like I could entertain myself for a moment and just connect to a pause in my day or in my morning and create some ritual in my life.
Yeah, I think especially like during COVID times but we had time to pause, right? But we know that creating space and whatever that way is, because I know you explained to me before we got on the call as well, is that you have been teaching yoga for 16 years, you said, or and we know that by creating that space, it allows us that time for reflection to get back in touch with our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And what
Yeah.
a beautiful gift.
I think like everything we can do, especially in the world right now, to get back in touch with our bodies and our hearts is really important. As we were talking about earlier, I can be very analytical. I can go into my head. I think, stress, anxiety, overwhelm, depression, like all these things that so many people experience does kind of bring us up. Like our nervous system is kind of gets hijacked by that stuff. And so we kind of move, at least in my experience, up into like the upper chest and the head. And like we sort of get disconnected from our body, whether that's trauma that's happening in the world collectively or our own. There's a disconnect that happens from our bodies. And that's, I believe, where we sometimes, especially if it happened before we had the tools, that's where we sort of make these inner agreements where we don't trust ourselves, or we don't trust our needs, or we don't trust our voice. And so there's this journey to get back in our body and to get back at home in our body. And so even just being here, or sometimes when I'm noticing I'm in my head, because that part of me is necessary at times, I'm working on having that not be like my home base or my default. And so sometimes I'll just even feel like my breath and just feel my feet and my legs. And that can help me get present again and drop the energy down into my feet and legs and like learn how to guide my own energy and not just letting it take over based on nervous system imprints or the world imprints or whatever's going on.
Yeah, because I think it's easy for us to get caught up in the moment and sort of run away with that anxious energy. I was trying to put a word to it, and I was like, is it anxious? Sometimes it can be anxious. Or frenetic. Maybe the word is frenetic. And I think it's easy, like you're in traffic, you've had a disagreement with somebody, you have a deadline that you need to hit. And sometimes just a small sense of guidance within you will help you get back on track. And that's what I found with using the Moon Deck for me, is that first of all, it brings community together, which is beautiful. And it doesn't take much to facilitate.
Yeah.
It's easy to use. So sometimes, and I'd love to understand from you the difference between oracle cards and tarot cards, and why somebody uses one versus the other. Because, sometimes like if you pull out tarot cards, right? The images are not always inviting, number one. It's hard to understand, and it doesn't leave you with the message. You have to access the book and for the deeper meaning. So I love the fact that these are just so easy to use.
Yeah. When I wrote it, I definitely, a big goal for me was for it to be accessible to many. Even when I was teaching yoga or doing holistic health counseling in my prior career, I felt like the way, like, I look at teaching as a medium. I don't really feel like I'm above, or I'm so on this journey with everyone. I'm so learning the exact thing I'm teaching. And it's why I teach what I do. And it's why my work always evolves, because I'm evolving. And back then I do feel like I was part of my teaching as a medium was to have a voice that was a bridge, in a sense that, depending on who I'm talking to or who I'm in front of, I'm not going to change the spirit of what I'm saying or the content or what I believe, but I'm okay shifting words around so that it's accessible, when talking about things around emotional health or spiritual health, or healing or personal growth, whatever that is. So with the Moon Deck, when I wrote it, it was kind of a mix of some channeling and just like flowing. It was also going through like a boatload of old journals as a student of my own note taking with the teachers I studied with, or notes I would take in preparation as a teacher. I went way back. I mean, really the Moon Deck is filled with so many voices, and a big voice in there was like really the voice that I needed at the time during some of my struggles. And like, it was kind of like, that's the voice, that's the person or the adult or the voice that I needed at those times. And so there's a bit of hurt in there. And then also like, more, wiser voices came in. And I even felt like some conflict when I was writing it, of some voices that like I knew would judge it. So it was a very interesting process for me. But the Moon Deck is meant to be a healing tool. It's a tool that brings people home to themselves. It's not like a roll of the dice where you're going to get a yes or a no. It's not meant to give you that yes or no. It's meant to be in the inquiry with you and give you perspective and give you some direction and guide you home to yourself, guide you so that you begin to trust your own intuition and no longer doubt one's inner voice. Kind of coming back to like where that disconnect can happen for some of us just in the trials of life. So that's kind of, it's very much a healing tool in that way. The difference between an oracle deck and a tarot deck is I like it all. I think there's a place for all of it. If you kind of go into the history of them, tarot, and what I've read, does date back further than oracle. They both do both have a history. But in tarot, there is a system. So no matter who's the artist is or who's writing a tarot deck, you're still going to be following that kind of lineage or that system that is tarot.
Okay.
And it does, you can kind of learn it on your own and for sure, and kind of treat it like an oracle. But if you really want to become a tarot reader, there is sort of a education and a history to it that has survived all this time. Whereas an oracle deck, the maker gives it the meaning. And so it's not always going to be the same number of cards or always the same concept. You might have an angel deck, or in my case, I do lead a 2-month training for the Moon Deck. So you are learning how to work with the Moon Deck, but I'm really teaching people the cards and some technique, but I'm really teaching them how to be a present space holder and to like trust themselves and their intuition so that they can be a great reader, and to really get honest with their own journey so that they actually understand with empathy what this person who's receiving them might be going through. And then how do you hold that space objectively and not interject with like how you think they should experience or feel the reading, so that they get to answer their own questions, even though you're the reader of that experience. So that's kind of how I guide that. And I work with.
You do that because that is so often people deliver from a self perspective instead of from delivering and allowing the person to receive, let it land, let them process it. It's so important. And it's a part of obviously something that we do in coaching as well. However, I think that often people are trying to give advice, and it's not about advice giving.
Yeah, and I think I learned that very much as a yoga teacher. That was something that some of my teachers carried through. And, I was guiding the class, like very, very detailed, like right elbow down to left ankle. Like I would get so specific, but then you don't want to tell them what they should or should not be experiencing. It's like, almost like when I would put my hands on their body and adjust their shoulders back, I would always, some people I'm not correcting you. I'm just helping you deepen it. I'm helping you feel your alignment. I'm not correcting your pose. You're not doing anything wrong. I'm just like offering you some alignment, some perspective, and like a different, more space in the body. So I carry that over into the readings or the training, and I'm still learning, for sure. And it's just kind of like, yeah, how do we guide someone's experience without interjecting it? Or like if you're with someone who just starts crying and bawling, people's tendency is like, put their hands on them and say, it's okay, and almost pause it because it's uncomfortable. But what if you just sat there quietly and let them cry and let them gush and let them know that it's okay to be ugly and snotty in that moment? And maybe you put a hand on the back if that's intuitive, but it's not to like be like, no, it's okay, don't cry, like, and just letting them pour out.
We're not there to fix it.
Not there to fix it.
To allow the experience. And I think the thing is that it's like the person in the room that immediately grabs the tissues. It's not necessarily that person's looking for tissue, when they're starting to cry. And I know it's a knee-jerk reaction. It's what we've been taught societally. We're not always taught societally to feel and to sit into the depth of the the feeling of like why, so that you have space, to your point about creating space, like of introspection of like, why am I crying? What part of me needs to feel this, right? It's
Yeah.
cool. I love the way that you're describing that. And I had no idea, I was actually thinking about it, was the number of cards. So I didn't realize that it makes sense from a tarot card deck that there's a specific number of cards, right? But I didn't know that when you have like more of an oracle deck, you could have whatever number that, the author is deeming.
Right. So we have 44 in the Moon Deck. The next deck that I create, I'm not exactly sure how many. I'm kind of like in the trenches of creating it slowly but surely. So I'm not sure how many that will have. But yeah, you can kind of choose how many an oracle deck has.
Any particular reason?
Well, when we first wrote this deck, so I think I'm like, did I say this in our conversation? We talked about so much today. I think I said this during the podcast, but the kind of one of the incubators for the Moon Deck was a new moon circle that I was sitting in almost 2 years with a group of women. And that before that circle, I knew I wanted to create a deck. I had a lot of one-liners collected. Like I don't do Twitter much now, but back then I was really into that. And so I actually like had an intern at the time, like go through my Twitter account. I was like, categorize it, wellness, this, beauty, spirituality. And so that's kind of where that started. And it still took a few years even from then. So I was kind of like starting to like work on things slowly, not knowing what it would be yet. And then that circle, I guess, just brought, and I had been doing a lot of women's work back then as well, like women's circles and women's marketplaces and things like that. And so I wanted it to be women focused. The moon part came in, and then and then the ritual piece came in. And it was definitely informed from all the iterations of my career as a teacher and as a student, but it kind of started to congeal once like the moon and the ritual part came into it. And I think like, what I write now will be definitely in the same kind of spirit and soul of the Moon Deck because it's me, but it's going to be talking about different things. Like I want it to be more gender fluid. I want it to be a different feel and style. I want it to be speaking of some of the things going on in the world, even if more poetically, because this was like a different conversation 6-7 years ago, where it was like women on the rise and sisterhood. And I still think there's a place for that. And it's still very much a part of my mission. But for me, it almost feels like I want to expand beyond that and be able to be even more accessible and more fluid and be in a boutique hotel, which the Moon Deck has gotten into hotels, but like kind of be like a little sexier in that way and a little more fluid in that way where it's not focused on men or women. Although of course more women flock to this stuff, as we all know, my yoga classes, my retreat, it's always more women who are jumping into developing themselves in a more, I'd say, expanded way. But there are men and this idea of community and gender and what's needed is like such a broader conversation right now. And in saying that, I do think there's an important conversation that women have together. There's an important conversation that men have together. And then there's a conversation we all come together. And those are 3 different conversations. Totally. So I'm definitely kind of like navigating that for myself and where I land in all of that right now.
Yeah, I love that. I was wondering, you were talking before we got on the call about your photography background, that you went to art school, wasn't what you had thought you were going to be doing in the first place, but then landed in it. And have you ever thought about using the modality of photography as a medium for your next version of cards or anything? Or does that come into play still? Just curious.
Not right now. I would love to do something with photography one day. I don't shoot so much in that same way. I actually got rid of a lot of my photography equipment when I went through that whole shift out of New York to LA. And, but I still shoot a lot. Like I shoot with my phone, I shoot a lot of content. My skills as a photographer, whatever side of the camera I happen to be on, like definitely has come in handy. So I would consider a photography project. This next one, I am already working with an artist. I can't say too much about it all yet because it's just so new still, but it'll be a different artist that I'm working with.
And how do you go about, I remember hiring illustrators and such. I used to work in lots of different, marketing mediums that required illustrators. It's very difficult to find a good illustrator. And I mean, there's a lot of them out there, but then how did you know, like, oh, I mean, because honestly, your illustrations are gorgeous.
Yeah, that's Andy Kay, who was my business partner, who is not any longer. But we grew and ran the business together for a few years, and then I kind of took it over. But yeah, she's an incredible illustrator, and her and I were friends for quite a while before. And at that time, like I was teaching yoga full time. So this was really like, I just need to do this. It needs to happen. I don't know what's going to become of it. And, you know, I've had a lot of great projects in my time that were successful in sort of their own bubble. And then this one grew legs and became a business. At that time, it was between her and one other old friend who had sort of like disappeared in Hawaii, and I couldn't like track her down. So that kind of like, you know, she was out of the equation.
Oh, I can't.
Yeah, yeah. And she was just kind of on her own journey. And then Andy, yeah, just like, I think it felt at the time like a good energy with me, kind of a yin yang.
Mhm.
And I do love art. I am an artist by nature, but I'm not an illustrator by trade. And it just like, maybe if I really put my energy into that, I could do all of that, but I'm more of a writer and a conductor and like a connector. So yeah, she just felt right with the vision. I invited her for tea, and we had a chat, and she was super on board. And I remember I was like, I don't know, I want to be with the moon and something like the moon deck. I was like, the moon deck. And I was like, I'm just buying the URL. And like, cause I just buy URLs all the time. So I just got it, and it was available. And, you know, lo and behold, that's the brand now, which is now expanding beyond the origin. And then with this new one, just a feeling, it was just like a feeling that I had been like kind of exploring a few people's work. I get obsessed with like screenshots. I put it in a folder. I start like organizing things and seeing colors together. And I mean, I could be doing that for a year before I make a decision. Like that's with the creative process. I think for me anyway, it's, you know, maybe one day it'll get quicker and quicker, but as of now, my process is stretched out. And yeah, so I just was like screenshots and collecting it and looking at it side by side, and like kind of playing on my phone with visuals and images and colors, and like kind of looking at that with the moon deck. So it's still kind of like in the you know, in the family, but also starting to shift as we expand. Because my dream would be to like, my dream with this platform is like that it's not just about me, and that like, and it's not, obviously I have a team and many people I work with, but even like, you know, giving artists and writers like a platform. And, you know, this is the first 2-month training. I've done 5 of these trainings now. They're about 8 weeks long typically. This is the first time where I've brought in mentors who are past alumni, so that they start to hold space. And so I want to like keep creating that type of thing where I can like sort of usher some of that in, but yeah, get way bigger than that and create a platform for teachers and artists and visionaries who care about the topics that we're on mission with, which is to create sustainably as possible, and to, you know, demystify conversations around mental and emotional and spiritual health, and to talk openly about intuition and know that this kind of wisdom in our bones means something, and it's not just coincidence. And just to really create a platform for all of that, whether they're business minded or more creative minded, and kind of take some of the guesswork out of it, because we have an infrastructure right now and it's just getting stronger, you know, fingers crossed, as we get through some of the ebb and flow that I've shared with you before this call. But that's really the bigger vision, that you can probably feel my excitement about it as I talk about it.
Well, I hear that your trajectory of your voice gets a little faster and more, you know, happier, I should say.
Yeah.
And growth is exciting, you know, growth and continuing to see the expansion of a brand, especially when you've been developing it over these last 6 years. It's amazing. You know, it's for me, seeing somebody bring their project to life there's nothing like it, you know, like this was just an idea, you know?
It was something that I needed. It was
Yes.
something that I played with other people's creations, and I wove those decks into classes, and I would leave, you know, deck cards on people's yoga mats, and I would let them take it home, and I would hear, like, whether it was a week later, a year later, how impactful that one card was for them during a sweaty, challenging practice with music. So it was like the whole experience, but it was like I really saw how these cards were informing people, supporting them, touching them in the same way that they had for me. And I remember I actually would reach out to most companies. I'm like, I'm just giving your cards away. Do you want to sponsor me? And I never heard back from anyone. I was like, I'm doing my own deck. And that's kind of where it all started. And then, yeah, like you said, it was just like a something I had to do. I really didn't know where it would go. And the community supported it. We did a crowdfunding originally, which is what launched us into business. And yeah, and it's like, it's still a mystery. And it's, as we talked about earlier, huh?
Crowdfunding was that you generated $50,000 to launch
Yeah.
the business. And how
We,
did that happen? Talk to me about that. Because I think
Uh,
that's one of the things a lot of times with female entrepreneurs, they get caught up in that they don't have the capital or what's not possible versus I know that you and I both look through the lens of possibility.
right, exactly. And I think one of the questions I was reading through in your email was like, what was it? It was something about just about like, do I have a belief system around opportunities? And I ebb and flow. Like I have my own hard days around running a business. I mean, like we talked about this like recently, it's been intense. And I do think during difficult times that's also a time where like some of the best moments for like the greatest opportunities and possibility for success is in those challenging times, because so much is needed. And I always say trauma is an innovator. Like if I didn't have the traumas I had and kind of got on the path I was on from such a young age, like the Moon Deck would not be here. It's truly born out of some of my deepest pain. And now I'm past that and ready to write the next one, because I'm so much more integrated as a woman and as a creator. And like just integration was my word last year. It was like a big topic for me.
Mhm.
This year is connection. I always like to have a couple of words for the years.
I love the fact that you pick words for the year. I do the same thing. I actually pick words for the day too.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I actually pick words for the week and I put it in I still like to, even though it's all on my phone, I still have like a regular calendar because I like to see it visually and your brain registers it differently. But I love using metaphorical words. I think it's so important. That's why I'm into your cards because it's my guideline for the day.
Yeah, I know it really, really helps. So I don't know if I answered your last question about, the $50,000. Well, I think I would say one thing quickly is if you're going to do a crowdfunding like that, we just ran it like a business. Like we really, cause I've donated to so many of those things over the years. And I'm like, wait, did that like CD ever happen? Like I just never know what happened to my money. So it was really important to me because I had those experiences, which were fine. I supported someone I love, but you want to see what you contributed to. And so for me, it was really important that we were basically done. All we needed to do was final edits and printing and get the money. And so we worked on it. It was happening one way or the other. One thing we did do is chose Indiegogo instead of Kickstarter. I have no idea if it's changed these days, but Kickstarter, if you don't make your goal, you don't get the money. Indiegogo, if you don't make your goal, they just take a higher percentage.
Okay.
So we actually put our goal at 48,000 and then we freaked out. We're like, that's too much. And we dropped it by half. And then we ended up making that anyway.
Oh my God.
Basically, 50,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting? Like the word that comes up for me is being vulnerable enough to ask for help.
Yeah.
So how, like, were you and your business partner on the same page about that, or what came from that?
We weren't really a business quite yet because we really had no idea what to expect. So it was Andy, and then I invited one of my best friends, Ashley, who's coming to Santa Fe in a couple weeks to visit. She also came on board kind of at like Andy and I had been working on it pretty hardcore for like a year. We were really speeding it up and like, we got to get to this day. And we were like, she does not want that. I call it Moon Deck as a she has her own thing. She has her own soul. And so we're like, we got to slow down because it was like just being too forced. The art wasn't right. Like we just slowed the whole thing down. So it took us 2 years. We invited Ashley in probably like in that second year. She's a marketing and branding director in many different ways in her life. And she was so great. So she really helped with like, I mean, down to like the font that we use, and the wood box was her push because I knew it was going to be a pain in my butt. But like, I was like, fine. So we did the wood box, which was the only product at the time.
Special.
It's gorgeous. And we're still with the original box maker. It's a
Oh,
family owned wood
Do you
maker.
sell some of those separately? Just curious.
Yes, we do. We have them as the whole set, which, comes with the book and everything. And then we sell them separately as well. So yeah. And then we did decide, and she was fine with it. We were all on the same page. It was just like, we were all hands on deck. And yeah, it's been a deep journey, all of that. And then so much has changed, which is a whole different conversation from back then of where we're at now. And we chose to print on FSC certified paper using plant-based ink. We wanted to be as eco as possible. It's pretty impossible to find 100% recycled out there these days with the print, services, but we are FSC certified. So it means it's more consciously harvested paper. and then yeah, and we did have a printer in Brooklyn at the time. So I was like, I want it to be local and I want to be able to walk to the printer. And so we did that for a while. And then we moved to their sister company upstate. And then eventually we did have to move overseas because we were realizing that we were like, I mean, we weren't going to make it. So
you need to actually make your margins and your operating profit. Yeah, it's difficult. So talk to me a little bit about this component. So we've been talking about the cards, but my question is, you're an author, right? So we can't forget that each card has some sort of meaning behind it, but there was a whole inception of what the concept was. When did you decide that you were an author? Like, how did you, because like we discussed your background before, and author wasn't part of it originally. You weren't like, oh, I was an amazing writer and I loved it. Talk to me. Tell me a little.
Well, I did. So I went to Hartford, Connecticut for college, and I was studying photography and mixed media arts. And so there was some writing and crafting that came into all of that. And then at that time, I did write when I was young. I used to love to write stories. I was never a math girl. I was always more of a writer and an artist. So that was always there. I'd say like really like consciously, actively writing did start in those early years where I got involved with a community in Connecticut of spoken word artists and poets. So I would go to they would meet at the park once a week. We'd sit in circle. It was a very diverse group of people from Hartford, Connecticut and all over. And I just started writing poetry and then learning to speak it out loud. I remember I was so shy in the beginning. And then like some of my friends that I became friends with sort of saw my potential and they kind of kept pushing me. And then we formed a group called Metaphoric Soul. And we started traveling as poets and spoken word artists to like different clubs and also going and working in some different like, you know, less fortunate communities and like working with the teens there and like kind of getting them to use their voice. And I used to work as a teacher in like a halfway house. So I was doing that then in Connecticut while I was still kind of working and being a student on the side. And then I stayed for a couple years and then was still doing that. And then that's when I eventually went to India to then photograph the Maha Kumbh Mela. So even and then when I would have gallery shows, you're still writing, like you have to write your artist statement. And I'm always refurbishing like my sort of identity as an artist, like I'm updating my website and I'm writing my bios. And so there's always writing in that. And then as a teacher, I used to do the big soundscape events. And I would write out these scripts that the musicians would work off of. And I would kind of journal my own teachings. And so the voice of the Moon Deck is very kind of bit of that like yoga teacher element. And so I'd say like a lot of the writing came from that combined with all the other more artistic, poetic sides of me that are really longing to come forward in my life right now, again, in a bigger way. And so, yeah. And so when I wrote the Moon Deck, it wasn't foreign to be writing in that way. I'd already been writing in sort of my own productions and, you know, organizing my classes and getting prepared for like the work that I was doing as a teacher at the time. And I also wrote a lot of blog posts at the time. I was involved in a lot of websites and blog posts. And so it kind of like overlapped in that way, I would say. And so that, I guess, taught me how to sort of write shorthand, like these, you know, condense but potent pieces of work.
Like you have to, you know, the thing is that when you look at the book, it looks like it might have been easy to write, but it's not easy to write like this.
No.
It actually like requires, it requires you many iterations and drafts to get to this length. And so that's why, and that it's digestible, by the way. And so I very much appreciate it because not only is it easy bite-sized information, but not only that, it's also like I see the amount of work that it took to get to that space. So that's why I was like, oh, did she hire a ghostwriter? How did she get started in it? It's just curious.
I just used a Word doc and wrote and spilled it out. Yeah, I think in the first part of creativity, whatever we're doing, whatever it is, that we just like brain dump, just get it out, no filter, no edit, no judgment, just get it out. And then you start to distill it and distill it and distill it and keep capturing the gems, which means you have to sacrifice some things that you really want there, but it just doesn't flow. And so this was like, to get this down to 300 words was actually quite a feat for me. That was the hardest part because I had just so much writing that I wanted to include and to distill and kind of edit down. That final step was pretty grueling, I have to be honest, to do that.
2 pages, 44 cards, like, because I think it's around 2 pages per card, if I recall from looking.
But each card has the ritual and the description.
Yeah, it's a lot. So this, which brings me to like another question is that, and we talked about this a little bit before the call too. We talked about so much, but we talked about structure and rituals and how do you, and we talked about the balance between being and doing and allowing a space for reflection so that you could bring more vision into your business. But then the part where the action's really needed. Tell me about your process. Like, how rigid do you have to be to make sure you hit deadlines to get this type of project done? Or do you?
Um, well, to be honest, I could probably benefit from better time management in my current projects because I'm wearing so many hats as a business owner and CEO and creator and teacher. Like I'm doing all these things at once, and I love all of that. I'm definitely ready to kind of like I want for myself and anyone who's on my team to like really be able to thrive in their genius. Of course, we all have to do things that we don't love. It's just part of the gamut, like whether it's painting or showing up in a business. But aside from that, my goal is to get into that place where I can really show up as just like purely the voice and like let my visions unfold. And yeah, so as far as structure goes, I would say I do think it's important right now. My new writing project, I have to constantly keep my best time of writing is like early morning, sitting at my altar with my candles lit. And like, that's like, I just want to enter that kind of more mystical space for myself. Yeah. And I ebb and flow. So sometimes I'm really in that structure and sometimes I'm not. So I would say when I'm in that structure, I benefit. Not only does the work benefit, but I also personally benefit because it's a really important space for me. It's nourishment on many levels. But I think it depends, like, as a team, we have a lot of marketing we do, and I'm editing all of that and writing a lot of it, or Rose is repurposing some of my old writing, which is like a dream to have that now. So I would say structure is important, but I am very fluid in my energy. So I also have to make some room for my personal cycles and ebbs and flow, because the structure and rigidity can also work against me, I would say. So I'm finding that happy medium for myself, to answer honestly. Yeah, I'd say some things really have that structure, like when it comes to work and meetings and like our deadlines. And even then we extend them because I'm seeing that more needs to get done. And I want it to feel good. I want it to be received well. And I do think there's some like magic in the alignment of things. And just because I set a date, I don't want that to be more important than something feeling complete and ready to share with our audience.
Yeah, I concur with that approach. I wouldn't say that everybody does, right? But I agree with you that it has to resonate at the right energetic level when you release it, and asking ourselves the question of how important is this, right? And really at the end of the day, you're the CEO and the founder, right? So if you miss a deadline, it's on you and you own that. And so it's really about that process of flowing in that creativity and that vision and what you're willing to accept, right?
Yeah, I think it's a fine line. It's like also like, okay, Aarona, stop bullshitting yourself. And like, it's like also that of like, because I'm also like, because I'm the leader of my company, how I show up matters to the rest of my team because habits are picked up. So I'm always like, we're getting things done and we're staying on point, but we are a small team and like there is a reality to that. So some things, you know what, this can't move, that's the date, but this one can move. It's like this thing can move, this one, you know what, that can be flexible. We had something, actually, we have a 21-day challenge coming out that's free to anyone who has the Moon Deck, and it's teaching you how to use it and be in a ritual practice in your mornings every day for 21 days. And so April 1st was our launch.
Okay.
Yeah, well, but it's just like not happening. So we're like, April 11th is the cutoff, and that's not flexible anymore. So we moved that because all these other things were priority, even though that is. So it's just kind of like knowing what's important in the next project I'm working on. I am getting to this place where it's like, okay, now that the business partnership dissolved and, I have some new marketing stuff, like all these really pretty heavy things for me that I had to process and just, I had to show up to. Like now more space is opening up. So my priorities are shifting again. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's kind of like fluid, but some things I do think if you're running a business, they're just it's business 101. There's some things that are just not flexible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it totally answers the question because some people would answer it differently. Some people would say, no, like I hit every deadline, I set deadlines and I hit them and that's it, you know? And so again, it just adds perspective that each person's different and how they process is different. So
Yeah,
we could clearly talk forever.
I know.
But I also want to ask you a question that I ask every person that comes on because I'm a huge person around values. And so for me, I want to understand what are your top 5 core values and how do you use them daily? Like, is there any one that like it is like without a doubt you will not like forego that value?
I am someone who's pretty, like one of my main, I really stick to my word with things or communicate if I can't. Like communication is huge for me. If I say something, I feel that, and if I can't show up to that, I need to communicate with that. So it's not that we can't ever change our word, but if we've given our word, I do think that it's important to communicate, you know, and honor that. That's big for me. Communication is really big. You know, just I'd say the part of our mission is really this practice of self-love. Like I do think, you know, I think when it comes to like personal development work, there is a fine line of like, okay, well, it can't just be self all the time. We have to eventually integrate it and bring it into the world. And I am an advocate for people who are on that path, because like I really imagine a world where self-love and acceptance and forgiveness is just what we're all doing here. And I do think we're seeing this in the world collectively, and we certainly experience it with ourselves, this sort of like battle and conflict or war with ourselves, with the world. Like everyone is operating from a trigger wound place. So if we can start to heal the triggers and wounds within ourselves, which we all have to varying degrees, if we can heal that within ourselves, like imagine like millions of people doing that. So of course the practice of self-love has an impact globally.
Yes.
And like we start to look honestly at the triggers, look honestly at our wounds. And it doesn't mean we're going to do it perfect, but we can build self-awareness around it and be brave enough to start to open up some of the blind spots and do the work, whether that's working with a card deck or EMDR therapy or plant medicine or hypnosis, or really any kind of counsel, guide, and therapy that can help us on the journey, and then checking in, because the discernment, you know, there is important as well. So that's a big one, is like self-love, acceptance. And then like really, I'd say like integrity in like,
I see that in you.
in honesty, like just being like, you know what, I screwed up, or you know what, like, I'm sorry, like I can work on my delivery. Like, this is really what I meant. And so that's important to me too. Like for me, it's kind of like, I really feel deeply. Yeah, I feel deeply and I'm an overthinker. So I'm always kind of balancing the two. And it's like, as you know, just really feeling, being honest about my feelings with myself first and foremost, like developing a level of honesty with myself where I'm not afraid of what's real and true for me. And I'm, you know, really learning still another layer of what that is for me. And then being able to like express that with people that I care about. I want connections in my life that are really vulnerable and really honest, and a deeper connection, whether that's a friend or a family member or a partner or a colleague. And so if I want that, then I have to be willing to offer that, knowing there is a risk of rejection there, knowing there is a risk that they may or may not meet me in that same way. And so that's something that's really been brought to light in the last couple of years, of like, I really desire that level of connection. And that means that not only do I have to give that to myself, but I have to be brave in how I show up with others in that way. And again, it's an imperfect, non-linear journey, but just that's a big one too.
Yeah, considering I was crying before we got on the call.
Yeah, yeah, because you were talking about how the journey is not linear. And I think another last thing there for me, very personal, is like starting to get to a place where like I feel more comfortable acknowledging and like admitting like the level of success I crave, and like why, like what's really underneath that has been coming to light for me. It's like, yeah, I want to do really well financially. I want to have options. I want to have freedom. I want to have a certain level of success as a business owner and artist and leader in this field. But it's not so much because of like the like shiny lights that comes with that, but it's because I know when that happens, more opportunities are available, more connections, more doors open, more resources to create all these things that I'm just like so ready to create and offer, and then start to bring others into that.
Were you masking the desire for success? I know a lot of women struggle with it. That's why masking behind the artist and, but not owning it. Just curious.
I think so. I think I always had like a certain level of success, but it was always like, yeah, there was like a stopping point for me. And I think there was maybe some like, I think I'm still kind of getting to the heart of that question, but I think there's like, maybe there was like, yeah, like some shame or guilt or deserving, or like, I have this belief that I'm very much in the thick of working on right now, that like life is hard and things are hard and success is hard. And it's kind of like a hard knocks approach that I probably adopted from, my father or wherever, like the world. Yeah. So I think I'm kind of starting to soften that, but it's like, yeah, let's also be real. Life is hard. Sometimes running a business can be hard. Like, I also want to be real about that. And it doesn't have to be like the default setting for how I see things, because it's actually causes me like, struggle and stress that I don't really, doesn't feel like I want me anymore. So it's kind of like, how do I also allow ease?
Sides that we talked about, bringing them both to life and owning both sides, but it's okay,
Right. And trusting, it's a big trust thing for me, and like starting to soften the grip and soften the tendency to need to control things is
one of the words that came up for me, because we've talked for so long today, was trust for you. And I heard it early on, but it's trusting your process and trusting you as much as it is trusting others. So that's interesting that we started sort of our earlier part of our day on this, and we're ending sort of on this as well. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would say trust is the biggest one, and it's why the journey of like intuition is such like a big part of my teaching right now, because I used to struggle with like debilitating self-doubt from being cut off from that part of me at a young age. So yeah, that's like been a really big part of my journey. And at a core deep level, there's so much trust there, and like a big risk taker, but it is like the day-to-day stuff that like I'm really learning to trust myself and trust my process and journey, as you said, and trust where it's going.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, your vulnerability, your honesty. And I trust that you will continue to be successful in this journey. Whatever you want to make this journey to be, I know that the universe will support you. And I feel so blessed to have been in space with you today. And I look forward to continuing to nurture this relationship.
Yeah, me too. I really appreciate your presence and your thoughtful questions and your vulnerable sharing with me as well during and before our recording.
Right now.
We spent the whole day together.
Exactly. Anyways, I'd love for you to share with everybody, like how they could reach you, where they could purchase the cards, anything specific that you want them to know about your brand, please.
Yes. Well, we're easy to find. The Moon Deck, MOONDECK. It's themoondeck.com. On Instagram, we're the_moon deck. You can also find me, Aarona.Leá. I'm sure you'll have it in the notes. I don't need to spell it probably. And then the website's Aarona Leá. It's all, whatever it is on Instagram is what the URL is. And yeah, you can go to the Moon Deck now and get what you desire. We'll have a discount code in the notes. We can
get a copy.
What's that?
It'll all be a copy, and maybe by then she'll announce her new.
Oh, actually, you're Empower, right? We can just do it's HER though, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can just do Empower Moon. Perfect. That'll be the discount code. And yeah, that's where you can find us. I have recorded ritual classes. If you're not ready to dive into a live experience, you can get those at the store as well. I'm currently doing monthly moon circles. I have one this Friday. You're welcome to come as a guest. And then I do my trainings, and I don't know when the next one is, but it'll probably be in a few months after this one wraps. So that's it for now. We have a lot of good things on the horizon.
Because the newsletter will say everything.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Just go to the newsletter. It has all of it there. And it's a newsletter that goes out a few times a week, and it has a lot of beautiful, thoughtful, loving information. We put a lot of love into everything we create. So the newsletters is, as you said, a great place to get it all.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good
thank you.
And we will continue to share our journeys with one another. here's some opportunities.